January 1995. Manhattan. In a small rent-controlled apartment on the Upper West Side, a woman named Anne Scheiber dies at the age of 101. She has lived in that apartment for decades. The furniture has not been replaced in most of that time. She has almost no visitors. Her neighbors know her by sight and very little else. There is no reason for anyone outside the building to notice. Then, her estate is settled, and a lawyer contacts Yeshiva University in New York with a figure attached: $22 million. The university had never heard of her. She had not attended it. She had never donated to it before. As far as anyone there could establish, she had never set foot on the campus. Her instructions were specific. The money was to fund scholarships, and the scholarships were to go to women. To understand why, you have to go back about 70 years. Anne Scheiber was born in the early 1890s, one of 9 children. She trained as a bookkeeper, then studied law at night while working during the day. In the 1920s, she took a job as an auditor with the Internal Revenue Service. She was good at it. By the accounts that survive, she was meticulous, thorough, and difficult to argue with. Auditing wealthy taxpayers gave her something else too: an education. She spent her working life examining other people's finances in detail, and she noticed which kinds of people ended up rich. It was not the ones with the biggest salaries. It was the ones who owned things. This is a distinction most people never make, and she was paid to look at the evidence for it every working day. A salary arrives and leaves. It is taxed heavily. It is spent quickly, and it stops the moment you stop. Ownership behaves differently. A share of a company keeps paying whether you go to the office or not, and it can be held for decades without being touched. She saw both kinds of return laid out in returns and ledgers, year after year, belonging to other people. She stayed at the agency for roughly 23 years. In that time, by her own account, she was never once promoted. She believed she knew why. She was a woman, and she was Jewish in a government office in the 1920s and 30s. She watched colleagues advance past her. She held a law degree that never seemed to matter. Her salary is generally reported as never exceeding around $4,000 a year. There is no way now to audit her belief the way she audited other people's returns. What is documented is that she left the agency in 1944 at the age of 51 without ever having been promoted, and that she never spoke warmly about it afterwards. She retired with a small pension and roughly $5,000 in savings. That is the entire starting position: $5,000, a pension, a grievance, and 51 years already behind her. What she did next, she did almost entirely alone. She began to invest. Not casually, and not on tips. She applied the same method she had used at the heirs. She read annual reports. She studied balance sheets. She attended shareholder meetings and asked questions that executives did not always enjoy. She wanted to understand what a company actually did and whether it made money doing it. The shareholder meetings are the detail worth pausing on. She was a retired civil servant with no title and no institutional backing. Sitting in rooms full of executives and professional investors, asking about the numbers. She had audited people for 23 years. She knew what an evasive answer sounded like. Her selections were not exotic. She bought companies whose products she could see people buying. Beverage companies, pharmaceutical companies, consumer names that appeared in ordinary life, in shops and medicine cabinets and on kitchen tables. Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Bristol-Myers, Shearing Plough. Names that a person could recognize walking down a street. There is a logic underneath that which is easy to miss. A company selling something people buy every week, out of habit, in good economies and bad ones, produces the one thing she actually needed, not excitement. Predictable cash, arriving on schedule for a very long time. She was not trying to find the next great company. She was trying to find companies that would still exist in 40 years and keep paying her while she waited. And then she did the part that almost nobody does. She kept them through the 1950s, through the crash of the early 70s, when the market fell by roughly half and then stayed down long enough to break most people's resolve, through the inflation of the late 70s, when holding anything felt like watching it erode, through Black Monday in October 1987, when the Dow lost around a fifth of its value in a single day. Consider what each of those events actually looks like from inside a life. You are not reading about them in a history book. You are an elderly woman in a small apartment, and the newspaper is telling you that a large part of what you spent 30 years building has just disappeared, and nobody can tell you when or whether it will come back. She did not sell. She reinvested the dividends and bought more. She had one enormous advantage that had nothing to do with skill, and it is worth stating plainly. She had time. She started at 51, and she did not stop until she was 101. That is 50 years of compounding, uninterrupted. Money left alone for 50 years does not behave like money left alone for 10. The dividends buy shares. Those shares pay dividends. Those dividends buy more shares. For the first stretch, the effect is barely visible. Then each decade begins doing more work than the one before it. And by the end, the growth is being driven mostly by growth that already happened. It is worth sitting with how counterintuitive that is in the early years. The difference between doing this and not doing it is almost nothing. You would not feel it. You could stop at any point in the first 15 years and reasonably conclude that it was not working. Most people do stop, and that is the real reason most people never see numbers like hers. Not because they picked worse companies, because they were not still holding them in year 40, when the arithmetic finally turns steep. The last decade of a 50-year run can produce more growth than the first 30 combined. But you only ever reach that decade by surviving the boring ones, and by surviving the frightening ones, which for her meant 1973, and 1974, and 1987, and every other stretch where selling would have felt like the sensible adult decision. Anne Scheiber never earned a large income in her life. She simply never interrupted the process for half a century. But there is a second half to this story, and it would be dishonest to leave it out. The life she lived while that money grew was extremely small. She stayed in the same rent-controlled studio. Reports describe furniture she never replaced and a coat she wore for decades. She was frugal in a way that went beyond thrift and into something harder. She was also, by most accounts, deeply isolated. She had grown suspicious of people. She kept her affairs entirely to herself. She did not tell friends or family what she had, and by the end there were very few of either left to tell. She was, in the most literal sense, sitting on a fortune in a room with nothing in it. She could have moved at any point. She could have traveled, or eaten well, or simply bought a new chair. On paper, she could have done almost anything she wanted for the last 30 years of her life. She did none of it. You can read that two ways, and both are true. It is an extraordinary demonstration of patience and discipline, sustained longer than most people sustain anything. It is also a life that gave up a great deal to get there. And it is not obvious that all of what she gave up was necessary. Anyone taking a lesson from Anne Scheiber should probably take both halves of it. The method works. The method does not require you to live the way she lived. She was not frugal because compounding demanded it. She was frugal because of who she was, and the compounding simply took her frugality and ran with it for 50 years, because the money was never really the point. In the last years of her life, she made a decision about where it would go. She contacted a lawyer and arranged for almost the entire estate to be left to Yeshiva University. Her condition was that it fund scholarships for women at the university's women's college and its medical school. She had no personal connection to the institution. She was not an alumna. The choice was about the purpose, not the place. A woman who believed she had been held back for 50 years in an office where she was never promoted, spent the second half of her life quietly assembling $22 million and then aimed all of it at making sure other women would not be stopped the same way. She did not want a building named after her. The gift became public only after her death, and the recognition that followed came from other people, not from her. Think about the shape of that decision. She had spent 50 years accumulating something in complete privacy, and the single most public thing she ever did with it was arranged so that she would not be alive to see it happen. She also chose a target with real precision, not a general fund, not the university's discretion. Scholarships for women at a women's college and a medical school. Every element of that instruction points back at the office she left in 1944. The money has been funding scholarships ever since. Women who never met her, who were not born when she retired, have gone through school on the compounded dividends of a $5,000 account opened in 1944 by a 51-year-old woman who had just been told, in effect, that she had gone as far as she was going to go. That is what makes this story different from most stories about money. The fortune is not the achievement. The fortune was a tool she built for 50 years, in silence, for a purpose she never announced. There is very little photographic record of her, no interviews of any length. She left almost no trace of herself except the estate and the instruction attached to it. When the university received the gift, staff went looking for information about the donor and found almost nothing. No one there had ever met her.